Being a marketer's no sweat. You just have to manage dozens of channels, launch hundreds of campaigns, score thousands of leads, and okay, fine, it's a lot of sweat. Unless you have HubSpot's AI-powered marketing tools to help you do all that and more. Get started at HubSpot.com/marketers.
No brakes, no brakes, no fear, no fear. The official British Speedway podcast.
So the 2024 Speedway season is but a memory, all in the history books. And in this episode of No Brakes, No Fear, we cast a look back on what happened in 2024 in the ROWE Motor Oil Premiership and some of the thoughts on how 2025 may shape up as well. I'm Ian Brannan, I'm the regular host, of course, and I'm joined by two top Speedway journalists, Dave Rowe, who's a voice on Eurosport and Discovery Plus coverage on the TV, as well as a journalist on the Speedway Star, and much more besides as well. And also Ryan Guest, again, another journalist. You've read his work in the Speedway Star, and you've probably heard him at a couple of the tracks as well, including at Birmingham and Sheffield, to look back on the action in the ROWE Motor Oil Premiership from 2024.
No brakes, no brakes, no fear, no fear. The official British Speedway podcast.
Welcome along then. I'm Ian Brannan, and I'm joined, as I mentioned, by top Speedway journalists Dave Rowe and Ryan Guest. And I think between us, we've taken in a fair amount of Speedway over the course of 2024, to say the least, across all of the various different leagues. But this episode then focusing on the ROWE Motor Oil Premiership. And we'll start with something that's probably fairly fresh in the memory, because you may have seen online the end of season awards and some polls that have been going on the British Speedway social media pages, and a few winners of a few categories as voted for by the public. You can agree or disagree, but these are the winners of the public vote. And starting off at Birmingham, and we'll start there because yourself, Dave, and Ryan, you're both involved on the announcing duties there in the box and on the centre green. And Dave, one of the winners for the most improved rider was Tom Brennan, who got a fair wodge of the vote, actually, and it's been a tricky season for the Birmingham Brummies, of course, but he's been one of the shining lights this season.
Yeah, always good to see riders, young riders, improving their averages, and that was the case really for all of these. And Tom Brennan really marked himself out from an early stage, coming into the Birmingham team, a team that did find it tough going for much of the campaign, but he was a shining light and ended up riding probably higher up the team order than he would have been expecting to, but generally came through with flying colours and had obviously a fantastic season in both leagues. We'll talking Premiership mainly this evening. Fair play to the other boys as well, because Keenan Roos certainly had his moments for Ipswich and again put decent points on. Ben Cook was a big part of that Bellevue team that were victorious, and Anders Rowe made good strides too. But Tom Brennan really did impress me throughout the campaign. Real attitude to want to beat riders of a much more experience, and did so on a regular basis. So I wasn't surprised to see him take the honours there, and deservedly so.
And Ryan, to you, I know you've done many interviews with Tom, both probably on match day at Birmingham and also for the Speedway Star. He has also been a rider, Tom Brennan, who's not been afraid to voice his opinions on what's been going on in the pits and sort of the atmosphere off the track, which wasn't always great at Birmingham this season.
Yeah, it certainly has. Obviously, Birmingham signed Piotr Pawlicki and Václav Milik as their supposed heat leaders to begin the year. Everyone knows now that just didn't work out with those two European riders. And Tom, in the early days, was kind of riding in a position where he was expected just to be kind of like a middle order rider, perhaps like a third heat leader. But from those early performances, you could see that Tom meant business this year. And in those days where Birmingham were finding it tough, they hadn't got a genuine number one or a number five. Tom really did step up to the plate, and as you've said, never shies away from having an interview and anything like that. And you could tell there was a bit of frustration creeping in at one point. So I know the Birmingham management team decided to experiment with riding order and riders' positions, and instantly Tom was the first rider to come out and say how he felt it was unsettling the team, but he never complained about that on race night itself. He just got his head down, knuckled down, cracked on with things, and I think his performances overall show. I think it was over 200 points in the end he scored for the Brummies, and yeah, I think he's marked himself as a genuine ROWE Motor Oil Premiership heat leader this year as well, and fair play to him for that.
And not far behind that, of course, we've got Ben Cook as well, a rider that was involved in an awful crash at Sheffield, and I was with Ben the other night actually, and he was talking about that. He doesn't obviously remember much about it, but Zach, his brother, does, and thankfully he's back and recovered from that, because there was a scary moment there at Sheffield. You were there on that night, but again, another rider there who's really now. Well, he's won the surprise of the season in the Extra League, hasn't he? Which is a big, massive trophy. It's the heaviest trophy I've ever seen. It's like marble based on it. They certainly don't mess about when it comes to awards there. But he was, the surprise of the season in Poland. That's a big accolade, and he's done it everywhere, hasn't he? He's sort of burst onto the scene now, and now looking forward to an even bigger 2025.
Yeah, there's something about Ben Cook which I think everyone admires. He's got a real tidy style, and obviously. He's so small as well. I remember the first year he came over, I actually got him mixed up with one of the mascots at one of the tracks because of how short he is. But genuinely, there's something that everyone does admire about Ben, and you've mentioned the progress he's made this year, and also that horrific accident at Sheffield in the semi-finals. And I was one of the first people, obviously, to get over to Ben too, where that happened. And I think I've said it to both of you on separate calls as well, that genuinely it was the worst I have ever seen a rider down on track. It was genuinely scary stuff, and no one knew how to react at the time. So to think that he came back from that situation to go on and win all the stuff that he did in the final weeks of the campaign is quite remarkable, really. And it's been another massive year. And obviously, it's now been announced he's stepping away from the Cab Direct Championship racing next year. And that is usually a mark of just how much riders have taken their racing to the next level.
Yeah, and we'll talk about individual teams, of course, shortly. Let's move to Rising Star of the season, because some of these riders actually come good in both categories. Anders Rowe is one of them. He finished second, though, to Dan Thompson, who got 53% of the vote in the ROWE Motor Oil Premiership as the Rising Star of the season. And, he's got himself in the main body of the Ipswich team, and that's not an easy feat, is it, Dave?
Yeah, I think this one could have gone either way. Anders Rowe and Dan Thompson were both the standout rising stars, hence they've actually both put their average up over the 4-point mark and won't be rising stars next season. Obviously, in this category, there were basically 7 to choose from. I know the couple of changes during the season, for example, Bellevue with Jake Mulford and Connor Bailey. But there's no doubt the two outstanding riders were there with Dan Thompson, who has really got himself turned round since he went to Ipswich midway through last season, and I think would probably be even stronger but for a couple of shoulder injuries. And Anders Rowe has had a fabulous season, actually finished up with a higher average than Dan Thompson. I think possibly goes slightly under the radar because of the troubles that King's Lynn had during the season, and he went into the top 5 at a later stage. Dan Thompson had a spell in the midsummer where it wasn't easy for him, but came back with decent scores, and they are both definitely riders to watch out for in the future. And
also making the top 4 there, one of the Sheffield boys, your Sheffield announcer as well, Ryan, and Dan Julks, a rider who's, you consider the injuries he's had over the course of his career, would probably make anybody think twice about stepping on a speedway bike again, but he's taken that time now to get back to his best, and certainly has put some strong performances in for Sheffield towards the end of the season.
Dan's one of those, like you say, first of all, to come back from the injuries he did the way that he did. It did take him a little bit of time, but I think that was only natural. And I'd say he'd be relatively happy, but knowing Dan as I do, he always wants that little bit more. There were some fantastic meetings he did have at Alderton this season. He scored 7, paid 8 in a couple, I think. And it's just that consistency for Dan on as well. Like there were some heats you'd expect him to go out and beat the opposition rising star, and he didn't. But then the following week you'd perhaps favour the other rising star, but he'd beat them. So I think consistency is something Dan is still striving for. But certainly there was enough there this season to focus on to take him into 2025, where he'll definitely, without question, be looking to up his game. And obviously the Rising Star programme is known. Dan obviously hasn't been selected as one of those Rising Stars, so a number 6 berth could be open somewhere else, perhaps, and that's what we will find out in the next month or so.
Yeah, details will start dripping out soon, I'm sure. Let's look at signing of the season, because there have been some big signings, of course. Can't believe that Pawlicki missed the cut on this one. That's the biggest surprise of the lot. But Jan Kvek came in with 36% on that one, and he's become a bit of a crowd favourite, hasn't he? He's a nice lad, always easy to chat to, great for interviews. But he's put some performances on the track for Kings Lynn. Everybody knows him from the Grand Prix, and he genuinely seems, keen and happy to be here, Dave.
I think of the 4 categories that we're talking about here, this was the one that I was most keen that a certain rider won, just because of the impact that Jan Kvek made since he came in. And Kings Lynn, bear in mind the situation they were in around May, June time, and they were desperate for riders. They'd lost a couple. There was a lot being said that wasn't correct about what was going on at Kings Lynn, and they went out to get Jan Kvek. It helped out that they have the Czech Republic links, especially with the likes of Thomas Topinka, club legend, who really did talk the club up to Jan Kvek. And it's a circuit where riders don't always find it easy, but I think there's always a feeling that Jan Kvek, despite the fact that he's been brought up on the foreign circuits, he would be the kind of rider that would handle the Kings Lynn track and would simply go there and get stuck in, which isn't always the case. So I'd seen him quite a bit on the European scene, in the European Championship, and previously in under-21s in years gone by. I always felt he'd make an impression, and I think it summed up his debut, his home debut. Was a Eurosport fixture. He won Rider of the Night, did his TV interview in the pits, by which time the parade truck was already halfway around bend 3, and he simply ran up the track to join the parade truck, and that really endeared himself to the supporters, and that was how it went on then for the weeks to follow. So definitely great to see him in the ROWE Motor Oil Premiership, and sincerely hope he'll return next season.
It's something you've both touched upon there as well with Jan. There were some riders in this year's league, not from the UK, who were not even hesitant. They just refused to do interviews because of the language barrier. And now I have to say, with Jan, every single time he was approached, because there was a stage where Kings Lynn, we were seeing them so regular and we were having to approach the same riders, Jan Kvek never once turned down an interview. Regardless of it's only a slight barrier, I think, between the two languages, but he always gave it a go. He was always willing, and I think that helped him, like Dave said, that helped him grow in popularity with the supporters as well, unlike some of his other teammates at Kings Lynn, perhaps.
And one of the other riders who was nominated and came in there in that top 4 was Antti Vulas, and I think a word for him coming in to British Speedway. He was not necessarily unknown because he had big performances, big scalps in the Speedway of Nations the year prior. But good to take a chance on a ride like that, and for him to deliver as well, and obviously go from Workington, ending up in the Bellevue team. But you can see him learning. I saw him at Armadale racing against Edinburgh, and obviously that was not his best afternoon's work, I don't think. But you could see that he was getting better every time. He was learning, he was sussing it out, and by the end, he was going out and winning races. So and a personality as well. But certainly, again, it's good to see these riders, and we'll look at riders who coming and a bit of a surprise or make an impact. And when you find a rider like that, they're new into British Speedway, then surely that's got to be good for the sport in this country too.
I think there's absolutely no doubt that Vulas had a key role in the Bellevue title success. Obviously, fair play to Workington for taking the plunge in the first place and bringing him over. Bearing in mind that Vulas came in after initially they'd signed Tate Zischke at Bellevue to replace Conor Mountain, who was very unlucky to lose his place. Zischke had his big crash, so Vulas then came in. And there's one race that sticks out, and it's right towards the end of the season. It's at Sheffield when they're under pressure towards the very end of the semi-final. They've lost Ben Cook. It's Heat 14 where Sheffield desperately need a 5-1. Josh Pickering is trying to slow the race down, and Vulas holds his nerve. He doesn't get affected too much by Josh Pickering's team riding attempts, and he brings home the second place that Bellevue required, and that race, amongst all the others that he was involved in, that was absolutely crucial.
Big one then. Well, no surprise then, considering that they're the champions, that Bellevue are well represented. I think anytime you have a Bellevue rider in a poll, the fans all pile out there to vote for them in numbers. And Dan Bewley is the rider of the year, but not far behind, only 2% behind. Dan Bewley got 31%, 29% Brady Kurtz. But they certainly are the riders that did the damage for the Aces in 2024, aren't they?
Yeah, they certainly are. And I don't know if it's just me. I don't know if Dave agrees. I know you're going to come on to Bellevue more in a second, but Dan, for me, kind of went under the radar a little bit this year, but I think that's more to do with the amount of expectation that has come from supporters in general about Dan Bewley. I'm not surprised that he won Rider of the Year, and I think a massive reason, and I know 2 meetings don't count for everything, but will we ever see a rider go through the card in both legs of the grand final again? I'm not entirely sure. I think that played a massive part in him getting Rider of the Year. But when you go back and look at the points he accumulated for the Aces, you know what you're going to get racing-wise. Like you say, it's just pure entertainment, particularly around the National Speedway Stadium. He's a joy to watch. And when you consider his performances on the world stage as a separate note as well, and how he's done in the Grand Prix series, while initially you think he's gone under the radar slightly, when you weigh it all up and sum it all up, you soon realise just what another magnificent campaign it's been for Dan.
Yeah, I'd go along with that. I think he's been superb. Obviously, that also reflects on how well Brady Kurtz has gone, because they've swapped the number 1 and 5 position at Bellevue throughout the campaign, and Brady Kurtz definitely did the captain's job, especially again in that meeting away at Sheffield in the semi-final when there were big races to win. But you look at, people will naturally look at grand finals. That's when the titles are dished out at the end, and to go unbeaten, as Ryan said, is quite some feat, whoever you're racing against. So yeah, I'm not surprised he edged it, but I think there was certainly a good cause for either of those 2 Bellevue riders to be Rider of the Year, because Kurtz as captain, that's become a really fearsome spearhead in the ROWE Motor Oil Premiership, and there's other clubs, of course, who have their own spearheads, and that's the excitement, I think, going forward to 25, is that we could well see similar rivalries renewed next year, hopefully with everyone staying fit.
Yeah, and of course, Brady Kurtz stepping up to the Grand Prix, exciting and fantastic for him as well, because it's one of his aims, and to go through and win that as well and be there fully on merit, not on wildcards or anything like that. He can look forward to a fantastic 2025. Emil Sayfutinov came third in the poll, by the way, and Chris Holder fourth. I just wonder if people have just put Holder in the comments, perhaps at Sheffield, because there's 2 to choose from. But Chris Holder getting the edge. Yeah,
Chris was the one nominated and finalised in the final 4 for the voting as well. And I can understand why Chris Holder got plenty of votes, to be fair, because he was a massive part of Sheffield's campaign. But when he started the season, one of his main aims was for an injury-free year, because he's had a real rough couple of years. But I think anyone who has seen Chris Holder on a regular basis in 2024 will agree that he I'm not going to say back to his best, because obviously he was a world champion in 2012, but certainly to a very high standard. Chris Holder was superb, especially around Alderton. More often than not, you could count on him on so many occasions, particularly after Ty Woofenden got injured as well. And I know we're going to come on team by team, but yeah, Chris Holder, rightly one of the top 4 in that vote for Rider of the Year.
So those are the top 4 riders as voted by you, and Rider of the Year. Well done to Dan Bewley, the Rider of the Year in the ROWE Motor Oil Premiership, and there will be a similar poll for the Cab Direct Championship coming up in the near future. Overall, let's talk about the top league overall, and a different look to it, obviously with many more sponsors, the commercial side of it, it's been a different beast this year, more professionalism, better branding. You'll have seen the backdrops in the pits and the push-off areas and all that kind of stuff that Phil has brought in, stuff that you'd be used to seeing in the Grand Prix and what have you. And more big names coming over here as well. We've had more Grand Prix riders, ex-Grand Prix riders. We're talking about Chris Holder there, of course, back in the side as well. Ty Woofenden has also been a headline act. Jan Kveck coming in, a new talent, but still a Grand Prix rider. So the focus has certainly ramped up a notch, hasn't it? And we've had some good battles through the course of the year. Just first of all, Dave, your summary really of the year of Premiership Speedway.
Yes, there are people who will naturally be negative about anything that goes on, but from my point of view, the overall look of the Premiership is massively improved and has been over the last couple of years. You see it in all kinds of areas. We've ramped up a lot of the coverage, particularly on social media, on a race night. You see that and you see what goes on there, but you only have to be at a meeting in or around the pitch to understand what's going on and why it's so important. In terms of on track, I was doing some stats on this week, actually. Less meetings being won by big margins, only one 60-point score this season in the Premiership. More last heat deciders, 35% this season compared to 25 last year. These are good numbers for overall competitiveness. And even the teams that didn't make the playoffs, and we'll come on to them team by team as we go, were involved in close meetings, particularly on their home circuit. So we were not seeing teams being blown away week after week by big margins, despite obviously some super strong lineups, some super strong heat leader combinations. I think overall it's been competitive. We got to a playoff situation where actually throughout the season I wasn't sure who was going to win it. I started the season thinking that Ipswich were going to win it. Then, of course, they hit trouble. I thought Sheffield looked very, very good. Then, of course, Leicester had their great run. Bellevue, I always thought would be in the playoffs, but would they go on and win it? It was a year when it changed throughout the year as to who had the real momentum, and in the end, the momentum at the end was with Bellevue, and they went and won it. But overall, very competitive and lots of enjoyable meetings.
Yeah, I totally agree with Dave as well. Going into the playoffs, normally you've got kind of like some instinct about who you think are the favourites or the team to beat. This year, I went into them and I genuinely couldn't separate the four teams. Obviously, there was a lot going against Ipswich when the playoffs got underway. You would probably say they were the team you would rule out. But between the other three, I genuinely couldn't separate them for the reasons that Dave's just touched upon there. As he also said, the competitive nature of the ROWE Motor Oil Premiership, not just with the big name stars at the top end of the teams, but the reserves at the lower part as well. To see them having their own individual battles against each other, claiming some notable scalps along the way was good. And from the branding side, from obviously the side we probably look at it more than others. I believe, I'm led to believe, it was an interview I did at Sheffield last year or the year before, where there was a lady making a cup of tea from the tea urn in the background, which kind of led Phil Morris to start thinking about this branding, which it comes naturally in other sports, but in Speedway, it's just always been, let's just grab whoever's here for an interview, let's record it where we are and done. But I think the overall look this year was magnificent. And when you scroll through social media on race night, and you see all the consistent branding with all the sponsorship logos and everything, I think it just gave it such a much more professional look on the TV meetings. Each one of those had a certain format as well. And after some conversations towards the back end of this year, I'm excited to see how, as a sport, we're going to push that on even further to another level in 2025.
Yeah, it's a little thing, and probably the majority of fans won't notice it, but you see this branding that's throughout the back wall of the pits, and that's not just there for garish reasons, and sort of over branding it. The reason it's there is it makes it easier for Eurosport, for BSN, or anyone to record an interview, and you've got a decent backdrop. You've got the branding there, because sometimes you've got a rider and the rider doesn't really want to come to the other side of the pits at that moment to just do a quick 20-second interview because they're in the middle of doing something. But if you can just stick a camera in front of them where they are and they turn around and they'll give you that 10-20 seconds, you get that extra bit of content there. You've got the branding in the background. The clients who have paid a lot of money to have their name associated with the sport or the meeting get their names in there as well, and it is a little thing, but that's why all of the pits are branded, and it just means that wherever you actually turn up, you've got all the kit you need there and then, and it makes a huge difference, because I have had that same situation this year elsewhere. When you go to the championship, not every club has that, and you're looking in the background of what you've got, and sometimes you don't really have a great deal to play with, but you got to make the best of it. But yeah, it just makes it a whole load easier for everybody.
I was also throwing the the media day at the start of the year, which was quite was so heavily prepared, but that was the first time that the sport had ever got all the riders, or well, almost all the riders from all the teams in one place at the start of the campaign for all sorts of interviews and photos and other featurey stuff that was done. When we talked about it over the winter, I think everyone felt it was a good idea, but whether it could actually be pulled off the way it was, perhaps more sceptical. It worked really well. We know also what was good and what could be improved upon, so I'm sure that will take place in the future. And that got things off to a good start, and that really set the bar, I would say.
And on that media day front, obviously, because it was run so close to the start of the season, there's only been certain bits. Obviously, there's been uniform photos that have been run on graphics and stuff, which have been seen throughout the season. But there was so much more done on that day in terms of trying to build engagement and more fun stuff on social media and stuff like that. And yes, it might feature riders that were with clubs at the start of the season that weren't at the end. But I think there is going to be a big push with a lot of unseen footage from that media day on the British Speedway social media channels over the course of the winter break as well.
So let's go through the teams. I don't want to start at the bottom, but I think it's probably where we're going to start. As you two guys are the real experts, really, and have seen in this season on a blow-by-blow basis. Birmingham Brummies. Now, the good news is they've had some troubles lately. We know about that, but they have said now that they are going to be at the tapes in 2025, which is positive news. I'm sure there's a fair way and a lot of work to go, but they're in a position to say they're in. And, well, you know, they were held back by, team building, really, weren't they? They found it hard to get the riders because they were late to the party from that point of view in confirming they were running. All the riders that they probably wanted were elsewhere or busy. But they amassed a team that featured headline acts, as we touched on earlier. Piotr Pawlicki, Vaclav Milik were two of the riders there, and then also the likes of Zach Cook, Tom Brennan. Steve Worrell was in there as well. So, they built a team that they felt was going to be resilient. I guess when you sign some riders like Pawlicki, a bit like Christoph Kasperzak, you never know what you're going to get. You could have a world beater or you could get Piotr Pawlicki that we got. And obviously that then, left him with a bit of a mountain to climb, didn't it?
Yeah, Pawlicki and Milik are the obvious main disappointments because yes, they weren't expected to come in and score maximum after maximum at that level, but anyone who's seen those two riders before knows they are capable of so much more than they delivered for Birmingham this year. Now, as is the case with every single rider, yes, there's going to be other factors going on behind the scenes as to why they maybe didn't score the points that they were expected to or probably should have coming back to England, but for me, they're just two riders who let Birmingham down. Let's not beat around the bush. They should have scored so many more points, and that's where Birmingham problems were. The management spent so much time, and they did. They were so patient, spending time after meetings, trying to get the solutions, and it just didn't come off. Now, obviously, Milik was replaced. Pawlicki was given a bit longer. At the time, I agreed with that because when a rider of Piotr Pawlicki, a former world number 6, when you work it out that he is going to drop to reserve, you can understand why the Birmingham management decided to stick with him a little bit longer. But when he drops to that level and still isn't scoring points, you know something's just not right with the rider himself. And his final meeting at Perry Barr, I mean, I think we featured the interview with Nigel Tolley straight after that one, and I think his thoughts were pretty clear, as were everyone else's. And it's a shame because Piotr, I remember him from his time with Wolverhampton a decade or so ago, and I really like Piotr. But this year, he just, I don't know, he wasn't himself in the pits, as we've heard since from Sam Ermolenko and some of his teammates. He caused a few fractions within the camp. So it wasn't just on track, it was off track. He wasn't helping things. But they should have done better. I think Stevie Worrell is a rider who will be still scratching his head as to why things didn't go to plan for him. And obviously there were a few other situations. The Zach Cook saga certainly got people talking. There was lots going on around Perry Barr. It was a big learning curve for Sam Ermolenko as well. I think it goes to show it doesn't matter what you've achieved, you can't just walk into team management and magic things up. I think it will have been a big learning curve with him, and maybe we'll get an update from the Brummies regarding Sam's future in the coming days as well. But like you say, look, it was a horrendous run, a club historic run of defeats. I think it was finally ended on 14. I had endured many of those, but Birmingham did decide to win on the first night that I wasn't at Perry Barr since 2015. So, but look, that was a good way for them to do the double over Ipswich. And the Mad Hatter has pulled it off again. Full credit to Nigel Tolley. Some will call him crazy and saying whatever, but you cannot fault his commitment, dedication, and loyalty not only to Birmingham Speedway but to British Speedway as a whole as well for keeping it going.
You can blame me for the Mad Hatter, because as soon as I saw the pictures coming through one night on Eurosport, I said we've got to show that. But anyway, no, I do agree. Tough times. Funnily enough, of course, they got off to a flying start, or almost did, against Sheffield in their first league match. Got 5-1s in the first two races, and took Sheffield all the way to a superheat. But then, as the season went on, they were falling short in several departments. The Pawlicki situation is bizarre. I was watching him contest the European Championship and be in title contention, and then he'd come back to Perry Barr and score what he was. Then out of the blue, he magicked up a miracle ride at Kings Lynn in Heat 15, coming from the back when you see his talent. So it's inexplicable, really. And then amongst the team, most of them had their moments, but not consistently enough. You look at Victor Lampard, who I think had a reasonable first season, but in every meeting, he'd have a race win, a last place, a third place. No real consistency. Brennan was the shining star in that team for the campaign, and Zach Cook did nothing wrong as well. And when he came back, he scored some good points. Remarkably, I think they won 4 league matches, and 3 of them were against Ipswich, and 2 of them in the last week of the season. Lots to earn, as Ryan said. The good news is they are going to come back next year. Doubtless there'll be several changes to the team, and hopefully from their point of view they can get it right.
I will say this, that one of the best races of the year involved Birmingham, and it was that one with Zach Cook and Ty Woofenden at Sheffield, where Zach was leading Ty the whole way round, and Woofy went round the boards, big finish, classic ending, and got him on the line. But for me, if you ask me to pick a race that sort of stands out in my mind, I'd say that's certainly one of them. And so they have certainly provided some entertainment through the course of the year as well. So let's not look away from that, and hopefully that they can have a steadier year in 2025 and rack some points up and make a fist of it. Let's have a look at Kings Lynn then, another side that missed out on the cut for the playoffs. Again, a frustrating one, really. They need to start like they finish seasons, don't they? Because they were going really well at the end of the season with a team with Niels Christian Iversen. Jan Kveck came into the side, and really since Kveck came in, they ended up with Louis Kerr there as well, Patrick Wadjelo in the side as well. Ben Basso, of course, who was injured towards the back end. Yeah, a bit of a turbulent first part of the season. That points deduction as well didn't help. But yeah, if they can start like they finished, they're going to be in a better position, Dave.
That start of the year was a disaster, and it could have all gone very wrong indeed. So it's good, I think, and everyone would have to agree, it's good that Kings Lynn did come out of it in reasonable shape. But certainly losing Tarasenko after a couple of meetings for reasons that really weren't explained, Mijelak, who got injured and then didn't return, and no team in this league is going to recover. And you saw what it did to Ipswich to lose their top 2 eventually. And Kings Lynn were going to meeting after meeting with looking for guests, or using RR, then having no facility on nights when everyone was racing, impossible to get guests. And to me, they did remarkably well in the end to get to where they got to, because certainly in the second half of the season, Adrian Fox Arena was becoming a very difficult place to go to. what Kings Lynn do have in their favour is one of the most astute team managers in Rob Lyon. There's probably no team manager in the Premiership who would outmanage Rob Lyon, certainly in terms of rider knowledge and booking guests and so on. And he got it right more often than not. Hence, Kings Lynn knocked over all the contenders at Kings Lynn in the closing weeks in a season that could have been disastrous, with lots of home meetings in the bank to come. Actually, I think for the home fans, actually became relatively enjoyable towards the end. What they desperately need is to have a proper playoff challenge. They've not had that for a number of years now. So you're absolutely right. They've got to get the team built to start the season in the same way. And Kings Lynn is a venue that we need to succeed. It's a purpose-built venue. It's a motorsport environment, and it's about time they got going from the off. And certainly with Rob Lyon in charge, they've got every chance.
Yeah, and I think something Dave's mentioned there is critically important as well. I know they lost their last fixture of the season, but they still put up a good fight at Leicester when they lost by 6. But I think it was they went on that run of 5 wins on the spin, and those 5 wins came in the last fortnight as well. And when we did the tour with Ty Woofenden at the Adrian Flux Arena a few weeks back, speaking to a few of the supporters that I got to on that night, they were genuinely excited already for the 2025 campaign. And like Dave said, because of how they finished the season, that really has whetted the appetite. And like you say, Rob Lyon, I think, is a fantastic team manager, someone the majority of people get on with. And I think all that Rob Lyon, Buster Chapman and Dale Allett need, I think if they can build a team of riders they can rely on, who aren't going to give them any headaches, then I think Kings Lynn could be in the mix next year, because there's, like Dave said, the setup is there. They have got some dedicated supporters as well, and it is time that they were knocking on the door of the playoffs once again.
From what I hear on the jungle grapevine of how their team's starting to look, I'm saying They should be in the playoffs, shouldn't they? They should be top 4. The way things are looking, obviously things are not complete yet, but I think there's a valid reason for Kings Lynn fans to be optimistic, shall we say, for the first time perhaps in a couple of years. But famous last words, folks. But I'm saying there now that I think they've got a chance. Where shall we go next? Well, let's go to Oxford, Oxford Spires. Big commitment for Oxford, wasn't it? Taking on 3 teams. Bit of a nightmare on the fixtures. Certainly a busy time at Oxford Stadium, squeezing everything in when you got rain-offs and what have you, which they... I've certainly been rained off more at Oxford this year than any other venue. I've made 3 trips with no return to Oxford. But, that's just how it goes. But they had a good team once again. Matt Sayanovsky, of course, the headline act. It took him a little bit of a time to get to grips with things, but he started delivering. Bomber, of course, doing what Bomber does. Charles Wright, Eric Riss, Ashton Bowgen in there, Rowan Tungate as well. And then lastly, of course, Luke Colleen in the mix as well. But they've also seen Nikolai Clint, Craig Cook, Louis Kerr and Drew Kemp. So there's been a bit of a revolving door going on at times at Oxford, but for a first season at Premiership level, I think they can be reasonably happy with how things went, Dave.
Yes, indeed. I think it was 34 meetings that were staged at Oxford Stadium, not including postponements or abandonments as well. And that's like Speedway from years gone by. That's like Speedway from 20 or 30 years ago when we did have home meetings every week. So great credit to Oxford. And certainly in the Premiership, the entertainment value, second to none. Last seat deciders virtually every week, invariably won by the Spires, unless they were racing against Ipswich. The problem was, the knock-on from that was that they struggled to gain aggregate points. And that ultimately was what left them adrift of the top 4 as soon as Leicester got their form going. But there was a lot of good racing there. I think if you look at it in the cold light today, you look at their team back in March, April time and compare it to their team in August, September, you ask the question, was it stronger in August, September than it was in March, April? I think that's definitely a debating point through some of the changes that were made. Some that were made with the future in mind, quite clearly. Others that were perhaps surprising at the time. But through it all, there was a lot of good stuff at Oxford. Janowski got going, took a bit of time to readjust to the UK tracks, but when he did, he was fantastic at Kings Lynn. In particular, got the hang of Oxford. Tungate was a really good, solid, dependable rider to number one. So I'm sure they'll look to try and build, I assume, around those two again for the future. And yeah, it's great to see they're committed again. They've got the use of the venue every week when they want it. They're going to do it all over again next season. So fair play to them and well done.
Yeah, just to expand on a couple of things from Dave. Maybe I'm being harsh as an outsider, I don't know. To me, Oxford threw away a playoff place in the ROWE Motor Oil Premiership this year. I get what Dave's saying. I get what the club was saying about transfers, looking for the future. But in my opinion, each transfer made them weaker at the top flight level of British Speedway. And they were sitting relatively comfortably and in the end fell out. And to me, whenever I saw them towards the end of the year, they lost a bit of that competitive edge that they had early on in the season to mid-season. And I do understand some of the Oxford supporters' frustrations at how the Spires campaign went in the top flight. But looking at it overall, as Dave said, entertainment factor, absolutely superb. I think out of the 12 ROWE Motor Oil Premiership fixtures on home shale, there was only twice that Oxford managed to hit 50. So that shows you how close those contests were with the last heat deciders and whatnot. And like you say, with all the commitments to all three of the leagues and everything else going on, full credit to Jamie Courtney. And a word for Peter Schrock as well, because being a team manager of any club is it can be a bit of a task in itself to commit yourself to three. And I think I'm right in saying he didn't miss one for any for the Spires. For the Spires, the Cheetahs or the Chargers. So yes, he comes under some criticism, and yes, every now and again you do question one or two of his decisions or decisions that aren't made. But full credit to Peter Schrock for his commitment to the club as well.
Yeah, so looking forward to 2025, and the good news is that Oxford will be back once again with the Spires, and they've already announced as well Luke Colleen will be continuing as their rising star as well, who himself was busy in all three leagues too. So a bit of a quieter end to the season for him, getting injured in the playoff final at the championship level, but he will be back at all three levels with the Oxford. Certainly Oxford Spires and Oxford Cheetahs. I'm not sure if he's doing the National League yet. We'll wait and see on that. Right then, let's go to, where shall we go next? We've got for you to go, haven't we? Let's go Sheffield. You're on there, Ryan. You're the Sheffield correspondent, standing on the centre green there. Bit of a minefield, the centre green at Sheffield, I've noticed, when you're out there recording interviews, because the Greyhounds certainly leave a few mementos behind. There is an unseen hazard. Fans don't see this kind of content, but you've certainly got to have your wits about you there. Yeah,
that's why I've always got some spare shoes in the car, just in case.
There you go.
It was funny, actually. We managed to get ITV there for the playoffs. And just before they went live on air, Damien Bates was scooping some of the dog mementos of You've Worded It Up. and the reporter from ITV said, I've never been to a sport before where the owner's doing this sort of job before we interview them.
Hey, well, welcome to Speedway, folks, where the owners keep it real. Yeah, well, a heavyweight side, isn't it, with, Chris Holder, Jack Holder, Ty Woofenden. Amazing they managed to get those three in the same side. Then we've got Josh Pickering, again, a hefty rider at this level of Speedway. Kyle Howarth, Jason Edwards. Unfortunately, they fell short of the title this time, but they did start the season, of course, as the defending champions. And again, once you need that bit of luck, though, don't you, in Speedway? And maybe that luck wasn't quite with them this year.
I think speaking to people around the local area of late, there is still that tinge of disappointment, which you totally understand. And it depends how you want to view it. I think when the dust is properly settled, it can still be seen as a positive year for Sheffield. They finished top of the regular standings. They added yet another piece of silverware to the cabinet. But obviously the league was the one they wanted to win. It's what they wanted to defend. And that's just the ambition that has come from within the club since stepping up into the top flight of British Speedway since the turn of COVID as well. The injury to Ty Woofenden was obviously a massive one. And who knows what would have happened had he stayed fit. Yes, I think they covered well for him overall. I think when they were running rider replacement, they were scoring at least 8 points each time as well. But as we all know in this game now, it's what happens on those big nights in September and October. And it's just ironic, really, that you look at the form that Josh Pickering went into the playoffs on, and he had a night that you would never, ever imagined he would have at the National Speedway Stadium. Obviously, bike problems in his first 2 rides, and then he eventually came good in Heat 14. And then you get to Alderton, where it's nicely poised. Yes, that Heat 15, 5-1 for Bellevue in the semi-final. That seemed to knock a bit of the stuffing out of Sheffield, but still you could tell they fancied the chances. And who'd have thought it that you go to Alderton, and anyone who's been there this season and watched Jack Holder and Chris Holder on a regular basis, as I touched upon with Chris earlier, just more or less unstoppable, just carrying so much speed around the Steel City circuit. But it comes to the semi-final night, and who'd have thought 8 rides between them and only 1 race win? You just can't ever imagine things like that. So it was the narrowest of margins, almost identical to the grand final against the Aces a few years ago. Some disappointment, which I can understand, but another successful year, something to build on once again. And I wouldn't be surprised to see too many changes at Sheffield next year, because there's certainly foundations there to launch another title charge in 2025.
Obvious question with Sheffield though is how you fit them all in, isn't it? With Jack Holder, Chris Holder, Ty Woofenden, there's a lot of points there now.
It is, and obviously they were criticised by some for going too top heavy last year. I think they would happily take that again by structuring it slightly similar again next year, because yes, it puts a lot of pressure on those top boys. But if you had got let's just use this year's team for example, if you've got Jack Holder, Chris Holder, Ty Woofenden and Josh Pickering, you would expect that you are going to get, say, 40 points from those. So that leaves only 6 other points for your other 3 riders to muster up between them. So I think and miraculously, Sheffield didn't make any team changes this year. Now, even Damien Bates himself will admit that's a blooming good thing for Sheffield to survive the axe of the Bateses. So I think you will see, and I haven't got any inside info yet, unfortunately, but I think you will see a similar looking setup in terms of the averages and the makeup of the team, and they will just be hoping that they can stay injury free, particularly when it matters most, and just hopefully try and get a few more points out of the bottom end of the team.
We know there will be a different rising star, and it'll be Leon Flint making the move, because obviously it was like a draft system, wasn't it? And Leon Flint has been selected by Sheffield. He makes the move from Birmingham as well. So Dave, you can tell us about Leon's season this year, because he's been one of the rising stars, came very close to winning that Under-21 title again. He's been in SGP2, which is a huge achievement for him as well. So he's really kicked on himself in 2024, hasn't he, personally?
I think he'll feel that his season with Birmingham didn't go to plan. When you bear in mind that he has been in the Rising Star system now for a number of years. When you go back to his Wolverhampton days too, he would have expected to move above that 4-point mark and have moved out. So in that respect, his domestic season, I think, won't have come up to his expectations. As you say, gaining plenty of experience now abroad, and both he and Dan Thompson could well have been SON2 champions had Dan not crashed at Bellevue. And Leon has got the experience also of the SGP2 main series. I think he will feel that there's another level to kick up now, and the change to Sheffield, I think, will do him good next year. A real chance to make his mark at that track next season is something he requires. And Sheffield as a whole, I think they've just found in the end how tough it can be to defend the title, because it's just not been done for a long time. You have to have everything go right for you, as Ryan mentioned towards the end. It didn't quite happen for them in the playoffs. I think we're all conditioned now to the idea that winning or finishing top of the league doesn't guarantee you success. Playoffs are here to stay, we know that. So Sheffield had a good season. It just wasn't quite the exceptional season, but they still have the silverware in the cabinet. And I'm sure with what they've done since they came into the top flight 4 years ago, they are good to go for next season and to be right up there again. Wouldn't at all surprise me to see them challenging once more.
Considering that obviously is brought up on the Berwick circuit as well, obviously different dimensions, but it's a fast track, is Berwick. It is one of the fastest, probably up there with Sheffield. So I think from that point of view, it's not going to be a track that'll phase him, because I think some riders who are used to going slightly slower in Speedway, which sounds odd, but not every track is it's a track for the brave. Sheffield, you're going huge knots. You got to go big around the bends there up towards the boards, and I think that's something that Leon will be at home with, really. Yeah,
I think you talking about the Ollerton circuit there, I particularly love listening to Ty Woffington on his tour, talking you through each line around Ollerton, particularly when you're going towards the fence. And he describes it as an adrenaline rush that he's never got with anything else as well. And some riders, away riders, say it's a bit sketchy. Ty says that it's otherwise, and it's easy to ride through. You've just got to know what you're doing. But look, that's another debate. But as for Leon, I think it's a huge year in 2025. He's someone I've seen right from the start of his career. For me, in the Premiership, he's not where I thought he would be at this stage. But I think the change of club once again will do him good. Obviously, the travelling from Berwick to Sheffield isn't as much. I think he needs to get his machinery right. I think that's something he would admit hasn't gone his way over the past couple of years. I think he needs to get a stable mechanic, someone who follows him around. I think that would help his cause. But one thing I think working closely with Simon Stead and obviously the Great Britain connections and everything there, that is something I do think will benefit Leon. And while even speaking to Leon briefly last week himself, he can't recall a good meeting he's actually had at Ollerton. But I think, as Damien Bates has also said, it might not settle in straight away, but once he's got the setup right, once he's dialed in, once he's used to working with Steady and the Tigers, I do think we'll see more of Leon in the top flight of British Speedway in 2025.
Yeah, and this is it. Fans will say, and this happened particularly, let's say, with Tom Brennan last year when he went to Poole. They signed for Poole, and everybody was going, "Well, why is he signed there? He's never had a good meeting there." That's the point, though, isn't it? You do that to sort of nail it, and then here he is now. He's at the end of this season. He's won a treble. He's been a big part of that, and you take these tracks that aren't necessarily your favourites sometimes, and then you flip that on its head. And as you say, the setups at Sheffield are major. And we did the thing on BSN with Rory Schlein actually one week, which was only like a couple of weeks after he'd ridden for Sheffield himself when he was guesting, maybe if not the week after. And he was saying that the setups that the home riders use are sometimes way, way different to what the away riders are using. They go around, do the track walk, and they think it's going to be whatever sprocket on the back, whereas the Sheffield riders will be running not even the next one down, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 down from that, to a point where you look at it going, really? But that obviously that is the inside knowledge of being a Sheffield rider of exactly which one to run at which time, and that's why some of these boys go around there so fast.
Yeah, no, it certainly is. Like you say, I still love the racing at Ollerton, particularly if you've got someone who is fully committed. I think some riders would hold their hands up and say they're not quite as prepared to throw it out as wide. But obviously, Josh Pickering is the one who springs to mind. When they take it to the fence at Ollerton, it's superb. It's all to do with the setup as well as the commitment, of course. And yeah, looking forward to another season of spectacular speedway at Ollerton in 2025 once more.
Well, let's on the subject of Ollerton, this could be the circuit that actually ended all hope that Ipswich had of winning anything in. Certainly in the ROWE Motor Oil Premiership, because Emil Saifutinov and Jason Doyle started the season, but neither, of course, finished. And when you've got a team built around two, world-class riders like that, and you lose them both, obviously, first of all, Jason in that crash at Kings Lynn, and then Emil in that spectacular crash at Sheffield, thankfully he's okay. It wasn't so much the crash; it was the fact that he bounced off the air fence and was collected by Chris Harris, actually, wasn't it? And Chris Harris's foot peg that really did the damage, I believe. But once again, just showing you the thin margins, Dave, between success and failure around Sheffield, and no rider, no matter how good or experienced they are, is immune from that.
Yeah, I make you correct that is the moment that Ipswich's hopes really were ended. I was at Kings Lynn the night when Jason Doyle crashed. That was a really horrible incident too, just a really freak accident where he clipped the back wheel of an opponent and ended up going over the fence on the exit of Bend 2. But Ipswich, without one of their big guns, still managed to tick over and pick up results, even though others were out as well. Danny King had some time out, others had bumps and bruises, but they still picked up the points and kept themselves for long spells top of the table. The problem came when two of them were ruled out. I have never seen a crash as fearful in that respect as Saifunoff, in terms of the way he went into the fence and then was flung out in that fashion. And thank goodness it could have been so much worse. And I'm sure for the people that were there on the night, Ryan was up there, he'll tell you shortly, that must have been a scary moment. And people forget that was the last bend of a Heat 15 when it was the last heat decider, and that incident decided that meeting. Ipswich could have won that meeting, but Sheffield in the end won it 46-44. After that did really give Ipswich a massive problem. They couldn't cope with being without both their top two. They lost, I think it was 4 home matches in succession. They lost the cup to Sheffield as well. And then, to be fair, they regrouped and gave it a real go in the playoffs against Leicester. Got some good guests in. They were very powerful at Vauxhall in the first leg, and then Leicester just nicked a 5-1 at the end of that one to get them back into it. The second leg, plenty of talk about it. Plenty of controversy about it. Obviously, Ipswich, I know, have got their views on it. There were incidents all over that meeting on a wet track. There were lots of falls for Ipswich riders that I think had probably a bigger bearing on the overall outcome. The one thing I would say is that even if Ipswich had made it through that semi against Leicester, I don't think in their situation they'd have had any chance of living with Bellevue in the final. So from that point of view, I completely agree that the season, in terms of really going for major honours, that Emil crash and the fact he couldn't come back or didn't come back or whatever the situation was there, that was the big turning point. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll see that top two in full effect again next season.
Yeah, to echo what Dave says, I think you have to give full credit to Ipswich for sticking in the mix as long as they did. When they lost Doyle, people expected them to fade away. They didn't. And you mentioned the Saifunoff crash. For anyone, it's bad enough when you watch it back on TV or whatever. But when you were there, I can't recall the last time I felt and heard a stadium just fall into silence. From the moment that crash happened to the moment everyone left, it was silence. When the result was read out, everything like that, it was bizarre. And let's not forget as well, Adam Ellis, I think it was, he did remarkably well because he'd got 2 riders coming his way after that second incident had happened. But yeah, it was horrible. I went to see Emil the day after as well, and I was stunned at how good spirits he was in. And obviously he's been recovering and racing back in Poland. And like Dave said, I severely hope we see both Doyley and Emil back for Ipswich next year. As for the playoffs, don't forget they were 16 points up after 10 races of that first leg. So again, you could argue that Ipswich threw it away. But I think they'd have ripped your arm off to be in that position in the first place. And as Dave said, the second leg at Leicester, yes, more than one questionable decision, which I know Richie Hawkins, Chris Louis, and anyone associated with Ipswich will throw back at you when you mention the playoff semi-finals this year. But at the same time, Keenan Rowe found himself on the deck several times. Danny King, particularly the one heat he was leading, just slid off inexcusable for someone of his experience, really. They had an opportunity or two to bring Dan Thompson in as well and resisted it. So there were little things there, but I agree with Dave. Even if they had got to the grand final, I don't think they'd have been able to replicate the success there.
Yeah, so they, of course, will be looking to get back to winning ways, get back to silverware. Again, it's been a long time until last year since they won some silverware, but there was this optimism that they could finally do it this year, but the injuries got in the way. Jason Doyle, good to see that he's now back, as you say, and Emil Sayfutnov, both of them now back on speedway bikes, and Jason Doyle will be racing in the Australian Championships in the end of December, start of January, when that gets underway. They've already named their rising star as well. Bit of a switch round, but a familiar face, Jordan Jenkins, rising star for 2025 for the Ipswich Witches as well. So nice bit of continuity there.
Yeah, and Chris Louis and Richie Hawkins are two people in particular who do like a bit of continuity. Jordan as well, I think the rising star, having that berth for next year will help him. He's a rider I like. I think he's got a long way to go in the sport. And for Ipswich, I think when you think of Ipswich the last few years, there's a lot of hard luck stories and they've had a lot of things go against them. And I just think that Chris Louis and Richie Hawkins will be determined to do everything within their power to put things right and get the Witches in a real title charge. Once again, obviously they were in it in 2023, but we all know how that grand final ended. But in 2025, I think Ipswich could be the team to be feared. And yeah, I am really excited to see their signing announcements because I expect Hawkins and Louis to have come up with something special for the Witches.
Ooh, well, you've certainly sold the sizzle there. And not the sausage. Right, let's move on to the top two then. Leicester, a team that I know, Dave, you've seen a lot of Leicester. Again, there's always been a lot said about Leicester since they came up to the Premiership level, having, in their previous experiences, of course, found life tough at that level of speedway, but different beast this time. And even more so that they should make it to the grand final as well. Not only the grand final, but the first time they made the playoffs, wasn't it? They've never made the playoffs at this level of speedway. So Stuart Dixon will feel that certainly, that was an achievement. And I know he's desperate to come back and have another go in 2025 and go one better.
Yeah, Leicester have firmly established themselves as a Premiership force, unlike how it was for the 4 or 5 seasons they were in the mid-2010s when they finished bottom almost every time. Different beast now, as you say. A lot of frustration last year when they dipped out at the very end. Funny enough, this season started off in fairly underwhelming fashion. They had what was clearly a very solid top 5 led by Max Frick at number 1. It didn't really happen for them in the first few weeks. They were there or thereabouts, but not quite in the top 4. Their burst of form in July and August coincided with a burst of form for Luke Becker, which was extraordinary. He went from scoring 4s and 5s to 14s and 15s almost, quite literally. It was absolutely a remarkable turnaround. And they suddenly, from a battling with Oxford for 4th place, they suddenly marched all the way up and looked like they were going to come top. Actually tripped up at Kings Lynn in their last away match, which meant they didn't come top, but they were certainly a form team. And certainly the form of the combination of Frick and Lawson as numbers 1 and 2, and then you had Douglas at 5 and Masters and Becker. It didn't really matter the fact they'd switch reserves around because that top 5 was functioning so well. And then it just faded at the wrong time from Leicester's point of view. And we talked about the Ipswich semi-final where they just edged their way through. But when it came to Bellevue in the final, that was definitely a step too far. It didn't help them. The National Speedway Stadium is not their best track anyway. It didn't help them going there on a wet night when it really went against them as that meeting went on, and it left them with quite simply too much to do. I think we have to hold our hands up and we say it wasn't a classic grand final compared to some that we've seen in recent years because of the job that Bellevue did on Leicester. And Leicester, it's harsh to say they didn't really show up because they were giving it their all. Things didn't really happen for them. It's still their best ever season by a long way in the top 5 of the sport, and it will give them real impetus. I don't think you'll see massive wholesale changes there next season. They'll be keen to go again and just put right that grand final because there was such a lot that was right about Leicester this year.
Yeah, as a team, they they did the job, didn't they? And I know, speaking to Kelvin on his podcast, he quite fancied Leicester from the start because he said, they're a good old fashioned British team, if you know what I mean. You've got the likes of Max Frick out there as a Grand Prix star, as a spearhead, but the rest of the side, they're all riders that happy to get stuck in. You've got none of the issues or anything that you might have with some prima donnas off the track. They're all riders that know what they need to do and know how to do it and have done it in the past.
Yeah, and obviously being a Wolverhampton follower for how many years, obviously that the riders coming over from Monmouth Green following the sad closure of the Wolves this time last year. I kind of always expected Leicester to be in the mix, like you say, the strength in the top five. And it's hard to criticise too much about Leicester, to be honest, as Dave said. It's just it didn't happen in that grand final. It's a season to be proud of for everyone connected with the club, a season that will be remembered. And like you say, yes, that first leg at Bellevue, it was rushed through because of the weather conditions. But they were still in it. 12 races gone, only 8 points the difference. And if they could have hung on to that, maybe the second leg would have been a different story. But the way it panned out, Bellevue got those 2-5-1s on the 4-2, 3 big heat advantages in the last 3 races in Manchester. And you could tell that really deflated Leicester. And I think they lost a lot of hope in those last 3 races. But a historic year for the club and a successful first one in charge of the club for Paul Cairns, of course. Stuart Dixon, everyone knows, and obviously Jen Crossland, the promoter as well. Plenty of hard work going on behind the scenes at that club. Huge strides in the right direction, and yeah, I'm looking forward to see what they can do next year.
Finally then, we kept them hanging on. The Bellevue fans, they'll either have skipped through everything else and gone straight to this, or they'll be saying, when are they going to talk about Bellevue? Why we last? Well, that's because you won the title. The Bellevue Aces then, having had to wait a fair while for that league title, they're coming along like buses now. They've just missed that year last year. Sheffield were the champions. The Bellevue Aces regaining that title. And they came good at the right time in the season, didn't they? Because they didn't necessarily romp away with things. Certainly in the early parts of the season, the likes of Dan Bewley, particularly away, they struggled with some away form, didn't they? Certainly in the early part of the season, but got things going at the right time. And yeah, the big riders did what they needed to do at the right time, and then supported by the likes of Jamin Lidsey, Ben Cook, even Norik Bladorn, Antti Vulas, as we mentioned, and then even at Rising Star, all the team contributed and did their bit, however large or small it was required to get the title in the bag.
Yeah, you mentioned Bellevue's away form there. I'm pretty sure when they went to Birmingham for the second time, I'm pretty sure that was only their second away win of the year. But again, as we've seen in recent years, their dominance around the National Speedway Stadium, it lends itself to extra league points. And when they get to the playoffs, there's always a risk that they could hammer someone at home and just have to do a certain required job on their travels. And like I touched upon at the start of this podcast, for me, Bellevue went under the radar all year long. No one was talking about them at the start of the year. No one was talking about them throughout the season itself. And as I touched upon earlier as well, going into the playoffs, again, no one was saying, that they're the team to beat or anything like that. They just had a real solid side. The signing of Antti Vulas, which Dave's touched upon, I think made a massive impact. He scored some big points at big moments. Dan Bewley, we've already waxed lyrical about, similar Brady Kurtz. But the rider who stood out in the playoffs for me, probably Jamin Lidsey. He was a bit up and down at points. He had some fantastic meetings, then he'd come back the next week and seem a bit off it. But for me, as a rider to watch in the playoffs, I thought Jamin Lidsey was fantastic. And this might be something that not many people would expect to hear me say. And some people might have.
Well, you bought a Bellevue season ticket, right?
No, far from that.
Okay.
Mind you, I did go to a fair few this year, but anyway, that's another story. But you know what? This year it was actually quite a likeable Bellevue side to watch. Now, having been around Sheffield a lot over the last few years, obviously I've I've had it ingrained into me not to think that way. But there was something about this Bellevue team that you could take to, and I think they'd got a real good atmosphere between the camps. And we've heard team managers and riders say time and time again, the camaraderie, atmosphere, team spirit, how much of a bonus role that can play. And I think that really was a key factor in Bellevue's success this year. And full congratulations to them.
Yeah, whenever you talk to Mark Lemon, he talks about the process, and it is a process of an entire season. And they were under the radar. I don't think anyone expected them to miss the playoff. They were always in that top four comfortably. But everyone was talking about Ipswich and Sheffield for much of the campaign as being the likely champions, albeit with that caveat that, Bellevue can turn it on, particularly at home, and rack up a big score. Now, for, I think, 5 or 6 months of the season, I'd have said if you put Bellevue against Sheffield, I'd have been very, very surprised to see anything other than a Sheffield aggregate victory over 2 legs. We saw them at the end of May. Sheffield ran right there in the wet and got an away win. They won an aggregate. They knocked them out of the cup. And then just suddenly it flipped. Now, whether that was the absence partially of Woofenden for Sheffield, and Bellevue were essentially at full strength when it came to playoff time, but I think you have to give them massive credit for the job they did at Oldham Stadium in the second leg of that playoff, especially after the Ben Cook crash, which must have been, it was difficult for riders of both teams, I know, on the night, but certainly for his teammates, and to still bring it home. The defensive job they did in that meeting was absolutely phenomenal, and I think at that point they made themselves clear favourites, and they did the job also in the final. So it's 2 in 3 years for a team that really struggled to get it home. Obviously, Mark Lemon got fed up with talking about 27 years without a major league trophy. Got it done a couple of years ago, did it again this year. So they are very much a massive force in this sport now. And to get 2 grand final wins in 3 years is a big, big achievement. So well done to everyone at Bellevue. And I agree, they were a great team to watch, and they were also a good team to talk to as well. So yeah, fair play all round.
And it sort of feels like there will be a couple of changes, I think, as probably there will be with most sides, to fit averages and what have you. But it feels like, by and large, that much of that Bellevue side is likely to remain in situ again, bar a couple. Because certainly I know that we did, I think you did an interview, didn't you, Ryan, on the track after that win where Brady Kurtz said he'd be back. Now, whether he was speaking, I don't know, just hypothetically, I'm not sure. But and Dan Bewley, you would fancy, you can't see him. He's sort of a rider, you can't see him being anywhere else. He's got to be the first on the team sheet, hasn't he? And, some of the other riders look like they're not going far either. So maybe a bit of consistency for 2025 for Bellevue.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing for most clubs, as we've touched upon now. Continuity, riders the supporters can relate to and already know, and things like that. But yeah, some big decisions for Mark Lemon, like you say, averages come into play, and that will all be finalised at the AGM in a week or two's time. But big decisions to make. Some riders are probably going to have to miss out, and the adequate replacements need to be found. But I think Mark Lemon will be delighted with the way it ended. I think when you did the Champions podcast a few weeks ago as well, I think I touched upon it, that interview with Mark as well. I saw him mid-season, and I'm sure he won't mind me saying he was a stressed man with everything that was going on around that club at the time. Not only the domestic fixtures for the Aces, everything that was going on with the Speedway of Nations and ticket sales and stuff like that. And there were times I thought he's taking on too much. But you saw him at the end after that grand final, the smile on his face, the Mancunian Mexican hat on, and he must have felt like it was all worth it. But as we've said, that's now in the history books, memories that can't be taken away from Mark Lemon or anyone connected with the Aces. And now, as Dave has pointed out from Sheffield's point of view, the hardest bit is to go and do it back to back.
And you talk about the continuity, and I think this is an important thing and something that the league is getting right. Certainly in recent years, we've gone past the days when points limits are set which decimate winning teams, because we've all been there as Speedway fans. If you have a good season or a winning season or a season where you come close and suddenly you find you've got to get rid of 3 or 4 of your riders just to comply with the points limit, we are seeing teams able to track similar top ends in successive seasons, and that has to be good. That's great for supporters, and it's also great for sponsors too. You go out and you're selling your product, and you're saying we've got X and Y here are our top 2, and they're still our top 2 the following year, and you can really build a club identity on that basis. So yes, there's going to be tweaks and change along the way, because naturally the top teams are likely to be above whatever points limit is set, but not massively so. So you've got the option to very much keep the basis of your team, and certainly it's mouthwatering. You see these top ends going at it again. There's still a chance for others to build their teams in a different way. So it's really, really interesting to see how it all work out. But seeing the same riders, the same top riders at the same places is, in my view, no bad thing, because they really grow identity and affinity with their clubs.
Yeah, and in the course of recording this chat, Emil Sayfutdinov's just announced that he's going to be racing for Torun for the next 2 seasons, and I think that gives an element of stability, doesn't it? The fans know who's going to be there. He knows he's going to be there, and I know that some riders do sign multi-year deals, for a couple of years maybe here, but they're sort of few and far between, and they're certainly not usually announced, are they? And that's sometimes a situation with the averages. Teams don't want to be tied into that, but I think from a continuity point of view, it would be nice for say Bellevue or whoever to let's say Dan Bewley's going to be here for 5 years or whatever. That he's going to be there. People can buy the Dan Bewley merch knowing it's not going to go out of date next year. They know that there's a rider that can get behind, and that build that local rapport as well, I guess, with the local media too, and become a bit of a star in the area. Yeah,
certainly so. And there's so many aspects. For example, my partner's young daughter, she was a massive Tobias Muchalak fan for Sheffield. He left, so she had to find a new favourite. Who knows whether that favourite will be back? So not from the supporters who've been going for years, who can relate to it. From the junior supporters side of things, obviously that they want to be cheering for their same favourite riders. And it is something where it is becoming a lot less chaos. I think we went through a few years where riders were switching around venues and things like that. But I wouldn't be surprised to see too many changes at too many teams in 2025 in the ROWE Motor Oil Premiership.
Who's the new favourite?
Well, if I tell you that, Damien Bates will probably second. But the new favourite's Jack Holder.
Okay. Well, we'll find out if that is a wise choice or not in the coming weeks. But yeah, might be all right. Might be all right. Well, look, there we are. 2024, the Speedway season in the ROWE Motor Oil Premiership is done. A highlight from each of you. What springs to mind when you think of Speedway in 2024? I'll start. I'll say I've already talked about the Woofy and Zach Cook race, but it's actually another Birmingham one, but Birmingham on the wrong end of it. And it was Sayfutdinov at Perry Barr, I seem to remember, and he worked his way through the pack. Again, it was a bit of a masterclass really on how it's done.
I'll go for a Birmingham one as well, as we're giving them after such a tough season. Let's highlight from Birmingham was the opening TV meeting against Bellevue, which went to a last heat decider. There was a lot of drama because of the clash involving Brady Kurtz and Piotr Pawlicki. Pawlicki went down, got the decision, and Birmingham got I think they got a 5-1 actually over Dan Bewley in the rerun to win the meeting. So tough season for them, but there were some highlights, and that meeting itself was the first live TV meeting. There was lots of drama, and it was a good TV story with the newcomers who were obviously going to have a tough year ahead, but getting a shock win over one of the big guns and the eventual champion. So that was a good night.
Yeah, for me, there's some riders who can make a gate, win race after race, and nothing really gets mentioned. You don't see many of their heats on social media or YouTube or anything like that because they're processional and boring, for want of a better word. We all love a bit of entertainment, and for years it's been Chris Harris, and rightly so. He still pulled off some fantastic manoeuvres this year. For me, if I've got to choose something, the entertainment factor is a big part of this sport, and I'm struggling to pick one because there's been so many, but I think Josh Pickering has been absolutely superb once again in 2024. he rarely makes a gate. He started to towards the end and he was winning by miles, so that was boring. But the races where Josh Pickering missed the gate and got involved in some real battles, there was plenty at Sheffield where he'd go from third to first, and it was superb. But I think there was the Bank Holiday August meeting. I think Pickering and Bewley had a real ding-dong where Pickering squeezed back through a gap down the back straight. And to me, they're the sort of riders this sport needs to keep producing, because yes, there's racing lines around the inside, and some riders prefer to play it a bit safer and that. But for me, people like Chris Harrison, as I say, Josh Pickering, when those two are in town, you are guaranteed entertainment. Apart from when I told everyone that on social media, and Josh Pickering went out and hardly scored any points the meeting after I told people to watch him. But yeah, that's been a part of a great season, and it's just been great to be so heavily involved in British Speedway once again this year.
And finally, looking ahead to 2025, casting your crystal ball a year from now, we're doing this podcast. Obviously, we'll be all on hoverboards and stuff like that in by then. But which team is going to be the one that we're going to be talking about and surprised by the most, based on your gut feeling?
I don't know about surprise. I go along with Ryan. I think it might be Ipswich's time. I don't like Ryan. I don't see massive changes there, because why would you fix what wasn't broken, as long as the riders are fit generally to come back? If you can put together a similar team, I'm sure that's what they'll look to do. So at this very early stage of not knowing what's going on anywhere, all the rumours, we read all that going on, but until we get told by the clubs what we can talk about, we don't know. I think Ipswich look really, really good. I'm intrigued by what Oxford will do in their second season, because there's plenty of ambition there. So, and of course, the one club where there is likely to be big change is Birmingham. So fascinating to see who they come up with next season.
I'll go for the others then, seeing as Dave's gone for them. Sheffield, I know how determined the promotion are there. As I've already touched upon, I can't see too many changes. But if you were asking me for who I think will progress and take steps up the ladder, let's do it. Let's go for Kings Lynn. I think Rob Lyon's having more of a say in the overall team building. And he got it right in 2021. He had everything he wanted, a solid structure there that many people didn't understand at first. But I think when you saw the benefit of having a strong reserve, it's something that Rob Lyon likes working. So I'm interested to see where Kings Lynn could potentially be in 2025.
A Kings Lynn Ipswich playoff final. That'll put some miles on the clock, but that'll be certainly a big crowds, wouldn't they, if that turned out to be the case. But we'll find out in good time.
It'll get Richie Hawkins active on social media, put it that way.
Yes, it certainly will. Yes, Poole v Oxford will pale into insignificance with that, but yes, well, that's all to look forward to. And team building, AGM's happening mid-November, so we'll know more after that, won't we?
Yes, I think obviously the Rising Stars were announced very early because the decisions were taken, and there was no point in keeping them under wraps because they would tend to emerge anyway. And the riders are now, they know their clubs, they can go out and get their sponsors, etc., etc. But I don't think you'll hear too much now before the AGM, which takes place in mid-November. And then after that, doubtless there'll be a flurry of signings confirmed. And I'm sure also after the success this year or last winter of the early fixture announcements, I'm sure there'll be a lot of work being done on fixtures, race nights in particular. There was a lot of talk about Poland on Thursday night. I don't think that will be the big factor that people are fearing. So there'll be a lot to come between now and December for preparations for next year.
Yeah, those preparations going on right throughout the winter. Speedway never really stops. There's all sorts going on. Many of the riders, Australian riders, of course, heading back home, and they'll be taking part in the Australian Championships and a few one-off events as well, two of which will be available on BSN, actually, over the Christmas period. 29th of December, when you're in that bit between Christmas and New Year and you're wondering, what do I do with my time now? Then you can watch the Jason Lyons Trophy, which is taking place at Mildura the week after that, the 5th of January. So heading into 2025, first weekend of 2025, you can watch live Speedway on BSN from Australia as well. The Australian Championships, all the big hitters are in that one, and you'll be able to watch that from Mildura on the Saturday night as well. And there's also Winter Speedway in February 1st, where it is Team USA versus Team GB in a test match from California. Again, that will be live on BSN as well. So there's at least 3 meetings to look forward to through the course of the winter. And we'll be back next week with another episode as we cast an eye over the Cab Direct Championship and much more besides. We'll catch you then. Take care. Bye-bye.
No brakes, no fear. The official British Speedway podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.